All right. Well, why don't we get started today? Thank you everyone for joining us today. Um, this webinar is Workers in Transition with Lliam Hildebrand. I'm Julie Roll, animator with the Energy Futures Lab and former Energy Futures Lab fellow. I'll be your host for today's session. So let's start by screen sharing some slides. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's really great to see you all here. Okay. This slide we like to show is a map that's an attempt to represent traditional territories. It's one way that we can acknowledge there's many ways to understand and recognize the land where we live, work, and play. I know we're dispersed in many different regions today due to the nature of our online gathering, but as I'm currently on Treaty 7 territory, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the peoples of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot First Nation tribes of Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation tribes of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. The city of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So today we're going to be using a few different technology applications. In addition to our Zoom platform, we're going to be using Slido to capture your questions and answers. So as a quick tech check, I invite you to visit slido.com either on your mobile device or on your web browser and enter the code AB Workers, and you can answer our live poll. So the code is abworkers@slido.com. And our question today is, would you rather travel back in time or visit the future? And while you're having a chance to answer that question, I'm going to turn to Lliam and see what his answer to that is.
Hey, thanks, Julie. Yeah, I really like that question. I think I'm actually really torn. I think for a lot of my life, I would have said travel back in time. When I was 13, I had a really incredible experience to be able to live in a place called Vanuatu for about a year. And it was a very self-sufficient island with sort of really traditional ways of life. And I really fell in love with that sort of type of lifestyle of self-sufficiency and just growing your own food and hunting wild pigs and that kind of thing. But I think ultimately we don't have to go back in time to ensure that we have a sustainable environment to thrive in, and we can hopefully move into the future in that direction. So I'd love to skip forward a few hundred years and see if we've gotten there with both a sort of complementary elements of technology and a thriving environment.
Amazing. That sounds great. I always kind of figure we're working on creating the energy future, and in some ways to me, it almost feels like cheating if we actually go into the energy future and see the answer, what we've created. So I think I might go back in the past, as what you've described sounds alluring as well. Okay, we've got some results of the poll. What does the audience think? Travel back in time by an overwhelming majority. Okay, a few futurists. That sounds great. So while you're finishing answering that poll, I'd like to give you a sense of flow for today's event. So Liam's going to kick us off with a presentation, followed by a Q&A, as I discussed on Slido. And then we're going to actually turn to you for some of the answers. We'll be discussing workers in transition as a community today, and since you're all part of our community, we've built in a conversation with all of you into this session. So at the end, we're going to put you into breakout groups and you can have a conversation about what you've discussed today. So at the EFL, we're really all about interacting with everyone, and We feel as though that we're stronger together, and so we like to include you in our conversations. It's not just about us telling you, but it's about you contributing your wealth and knowledge to the conversation as well. All right, we got some futurists. We can move on to the next slide, and I'll tell you about how did this session come about. So this, in March 2020, the lab's managing director, Alison Cretney, co-wrote an article with the lab's founding director, Chad Park, titled 5 Ideas for Alberta's Economic Recovery. These ideas included hydrogen, geothermal energy, bitumen beyond combustion, artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as lithium. The article was very well received, and in response, we held the Energy Futures Lab hosted 2 events featuring Energy Futures Lab fellows with expertise in those fields. Of course, we know, as well as we heard from many of you, that there's many more big ideas shaping our energy future, which is why we've decided to extend this conversation through October of 2020. So the Energy Futures Lab Big Ideas for Our Energy Future is an interactive speaker series in which participants are invited to connect virtually with members of the EFL network. So this is one of the sessions in a series. You can see the upcoming events there and the dates. So we encourage you to sign up for those and stay tuned for more information. And by discussing new ideas as a community, the lab sees an opportunity to encourage cross-pollination across all stakeholders in the energy system on the topic of how we can create the energy system the future requires of us while fueling the economic recovery in Alberta. Participants are encouraged to build connections and explore how various topics might be shaping Canada's collective relationship with the energy landscape. So thank you very much to Calgary Economic Development. They've sponsored this session along with our upcoming sessions on carbon capture, utilization and storage and inactive wells. So thanks again to Calgary Economic Development. Now, for the reason you've all come here today. So this topic is particularly exciting to me. I'm a former oil and gas worker who has transitioned my career to help create the energy future. And I met Lliam Hildebrand when I joined the EFL as a fellow in 2017. And we've worked on several projects together over the years. Lliam is the executive director of Iron and Earth and has been an Energy Futures Lab fellow since its inception in 2015. So I'll turn the stage over to Lliam now to introduce himself and Iron and Earth a little further. Over to you, Lliam.
Amazing. Thank you, Julie. And I would really love to sort of re-emphasize Julie's point that this is a real opportunity for myself and our organization, Iron and Earth, to really listen to all of you. This is actually excellent timing for us to be presenting these ideas because we're really sort of in the final stages of stakeholder feedback on this sort of 4-point plan that I'll be walking you through. So I'm really excited that we've been able to sort of create some questions for some engagement, and we have opportunities to hear from you about if you think we're on the right track and if these are ideas that are really worth pushing for to get implemented. So I'll just start with a screen share. Cool, so I'm gonna walk you through a little bit of my personal story, the story of Iron and Earth, and lay out some of the ideas that we are working on right now. So I started my my career in the steel industry in this steel fabricating shop you can see here. I'm actually in this photo amongst my coworkers. Is about 15 years ago now, or about then. And in this picture, we're fabricating a lot of pressure vessels for the oil sands. And we built all kinds of projects in this manufacturing facility. I actually really loved this job. And we built flare stacks that we shipped off to China. We built a lot of drilling rigs, and we actually also built this wind farm weather station. This was the first project that I was able to be the lead hand on, And so that was pretty exciting in its own right. But I also got really excited about the technology itself, and the concept that you could harness energy from the wind was a concept that was actually really new to me. And this was sort of about 10 years ago, and around that time, I came across the Al Gore documentary and sort of realized that a lot of the infrastructure I was building was creating this global crisis of accelerating CO2 levels. And I also realized at the same time that this wind farm weather station that I built could actually help address that. So I became quite passionate about this concept that my skills could either go towards creating this global warming crisis or reversing it. And so I went on quite a bit of a journey. I ended up quitting my job and kind of trying to figure out how to get involved in the renewable energy industry. And that was about 10 years ago. And I was not very successful at first. This was a photo of me probably 6 months after quitting my job. And I had actually found myself even deeper into the heart of the industry, working in Fort McMurray for about 6 years, on and off. And I just really not successful in finding my renewable path. But then in 2015, oil prices crashed, and I'm sure a lot of the people on this webinar will remember the chaos that really emerged in early 2015, summer of 2015, thousands of layoffs, basically on a daily basis. And conversations in the lunchroom were naturally really revolving around this situation. So at this time, renewable energy was becoming much more cost competitive, and we were seeing the beginning of the sort of exponential growth in renewable energy technologies. So it was a fairly natural conversation to be having. Wow, we're losing jobs in this industry, but there's all of these new jobs being created in this emerging industry globally. So when are these jobs going to be coming to Canada? And are they jobs that we could actually get ourselves? And the more we looked into it, the more it looked like a very feasible scenario that we could not transition into renewable energy jobs like I tried to do necessarily, but diversify into renewable energy jobs. And so we could continue working in the oil sands here and there, and that would likely be the bread and butter for a number of years moving forward, but that we could, our vision was really that we could begin incorporating renewable energy into our work scope to help diversify and smooth out some of that boom and bust. And so our vision has really become that fossil fuel industry and Indigenous workers will play a leading role in building the policy and infrastructure required to reach global climate targets. And I'd like to just sort of paint that picture a little bit more clearly for you. So here is a picture of an oil refinery. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with these types of images and have likely worked on these types of projects. And here is a picture of a hydrogen electrolysis plant. And as you can see, if I flip back and forth between these two, they're almost identical in terms of being very large scale steel infrastructure projects. They use a lot of the same types of technologies and materials. And so it's not a major stretch of the imagination to realize that the entire life cycle of this project, everything from the development of the project, securing financing, doing the environmental assessments, doing the stakeholder engagement, all the way through to the actual manufacturing of the components, the construction of the facility itself, all of the installation of the components, and all the way through the operations, the maintenance, and eventually the decommissioning or the repurposing. So if you look at other examples as well, you have the same story. So here's a biofuel plant, Entercounty, Edmonton. Again, very similar technologies. Here's an image of a geothermal plant. And you can see a lot of similar technology on the surface. And actually underground, there's a whole other layer of similarity where geothermal development requires many of the same skills of drillers that are currently looking for work. And here's a fairly grainy photo of a biomass plant that I actually helped build in that same fabricating facility that I built a wind farm weather station. And here's a picture of a small modular reactor on the back of a truck, which would be utilized for nuclear technologies, which are sort of emerging and actually in use in Ontario. And it's not a stretch of the imagination here to imagine something like this driving down the streets of Alberta. So we really envision at Iron and Earth, and this is what we're hoping to get some feedback on today, is a 4-point plan to really build on the strengths of our industry as sort of pictured above, and how we can leverage those strengths to support a green recovery during this sort of major moment that we're in globally. And we envision a transformation, but even more so an upgrade of our existing workforce, business, infrastructure, and environment. So I'll take the rest of the presentation to really walk through those elements. So one thing we imagine being possible is when we're focusing on that first piece, that workforce piece, how do we upgrade the workforce? Well, we have a lot of the existing workers already that have gone through these extensive 4-year programs, whether it's engineering programs or trades programs, and we don't need to put them all through another 4-year program. That would be a real waste of money and a waste of everybody's time and talent. So we imagine a national upskilling initiative that's focused on really rapid upskilling of existing workers into these new technologies like hydrogen and geothermal, biofuels, biomass. And sort of one example of that is some of the focus of Iron and Earth has been on training programs. So here's a picture of a training program we completed in partnership with the Louis Bull Tribe. It was 5 days long. It was primarily electricians. And after the program, all of the people were prepared with the skills to work in solar PV jobs. And some of them did secure that employment. So that's one example of just in 5 days, we can take electricians that have spent decades working in the oil and gas industry and help them diversify into new careers. Another sort of a case study of this concept is in Scotland. They implemented the Oil and Gas Training Transition Fund, which over 3 years, they invested $20 million, and 70% of the 3,592 workers secured jobs or additional training. So we really feel that this could be implemented in really every country as countries work to upskill their workforces. And Canada is in a particularly good place, and Alberta in particular as well, due to the high concentration of workers that have experience on these large-scale industrial projects. Secondly, we really need to support businesses, obviously, because businesses ultimately are what employ workers, and we across the globe and in Canada again particularly have an incredible strength of businesses providing services for all these different types of industrial projects. So we imagine a national repositioning initiative that's really broken into two components. The first component is retooling. So kind of revisiting that first image of myself and my coworkers in the pressure vessel manufacturing facility. We were able to build some renewable energy technologies, and we were actually bidding on a job for wind tower manufacturing for a project sort of coming to the area. And we were going to have to invest in a new set of roles and make a pretty heavy investment. And that left us less competitive to overseas bids for the contract. And so one area where government could come in and support business would be in sort of upgrading their facilities and being able to position themselves for these types of contracts. Also pivoting. So here's sort of two images of a drilling jackup rig for the oil and gas industry beside a jackup rig for offshore wind installation. So you can imagine that the businesses running these types of operations wouldn't have a huge leap to sort of pivot services from one industry to another. So one great case study of that is Ørsted in Denmark. In 2006, they made a commitment to really pivot towards renewables, and they've accomplished that and reduced carbon intensity by over 80% and have divested now from oil and gas. So third is a real focus on infrastructure. So if we're able to look at all of the infrastructure that we have across Canada and what we can do to first retrofit to ensure that it's as energy efficient as possible, and then for other infrastructure, we can actually use it for new uses. So retrofitting includes everything from industrial scale to commercial and residential. The transition from a worker in the oil sands to commercial and residential is slightly more complicated, but not impossible by any means. But there is a lot of sort of industrial scale retrofitting that is also going to be required. One example of that is Shell Rhineland refinery in Germany uses zero emissions feedstock, hydrogen primarily, and they've actually done a recent retrofit to include the use of green hydrogen, and they're actually using that sort of case study to establish a hydrogen model region in the area. And repurposing is a really exciting prospect where across Canada and Alberta, there's a lot of abandoned and orphaned wells. And a lot of the roads and the power lines and the existing sites can actually be used for new types of energy like solar, geothermal, and also lithium production and a wide range of other uses. And finally, in this process, we of course can't forget the environment itself as a real fundamental pillar of the economy and our prosperity. And we're really looking at what a national nature-based solutions initiative would look like and how that would complement these other three national initiatives. and this one being focused on upgrading the environment. So some examples of that are sort of urban wetlands and protecting and revitalizing forest areas and reefs and dunes and beaches. It's a pretty vast area that's actually fairly new to our organization in terms of our thinking, but it does make a lot of sense when you're thinking about how many workers in the fossil fuel industry actually do work in sort of the environmental side of things, and those skills are actually quite transferable over. There's obviously a ton of reclamation work involved in any project in the oil and gas industry, and those skills can be largely applied to the emerging nature-based solutions industry. So that sort of wraps it up, and I am out of time. So I guess we'll kind of throw it back to you in a little bit here, and really looking forward to your honest thoughts. These aren't written in stone yet, and just looking forward to hearing any feedback you have on our thinking.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lliam. So just a reminder to everybody, we're going to be capturing your questions on Slido. So if you have questions for Lliam, please type those in to Slido so that we can capture those and ask those of him. I see there's one question here at the moment. I wonder how to create the market draw for renewables fabrication to come to the shops in Alberta. Does it start with trade missions? Any thoughts on that, Lliam?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously, you can't justify retooling a manufacturing facility to build wind turbines if that fabricating facility doesn't have a viable business model to actually be producing those. So definitely a sort of chicken egg kind of scenario there. I know in some of the conversations that I've had with turbine and wind manufacturers, there hasn't been quite enough demand. Like, there was a projection of a lot of growth for the wind industry in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but it was almost like barely not quite enough to justify moving a whole whack of fabrication capacity to those provinces. So I think big picture planning and really setting ambitious 2050 targets and 2030 targets and making that really clear industry-wide is really the starting point. And that will give businesses the confidence they need to be able to move in that direction. And if it can be a coordinated process with government support, then we can help avoid scenarios like we had in Ontario, when Ontario moved forward on a lot of local procurement of the wind infrastructure and ended up getting in a big tangle with NAFTA restrictions, and a lot of the fabricating facilities actually had to shut down. So that was a lot of wasted money there. So hopefully by proactive retooling, we can support businesses and not end up in trade tangles.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Okay, next question is, how many transitional skill building courses are you offering, such as your electrician example?
Yeah, so we actually just finished developing 3 training programs, and we're about to start delivering that we're testing them out this fall, actually, and then we're gonna start delivering them in the spring of next year. And so they include a 5-day solar PV course focused on electricians only. So it's fairly technical. Then we have another 10-day 5 to 10 day community-based program. So that's for non-electricians to do the non-electrical scope of projects. They won't be doing any electrical jurisdiction work, but we'll be training them on how to work safely alongside electricians and how to do more of sort of the labor side of infrastructure. And then we actually have a 5 to 10 day wind energy training program, which is focused on helping prepare people to enter wind related employment. So it's not the sort of 2-year Lethbridge College wind tech program by any means, but it's enough to get a pretty good understanding of how the wind energy industry works, how to work safely on a job site, and how to approach the process of securing employment in that industry.
Awesome. Sounds great. You mentioned repurposing. Just wondering if you have an idea of the approximate number of abandoned or orphaned wells currently in Canada.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. And Keith Hirsch would pin me down for not knowing this off by heart. I think Alberta, isn't it the 100,000 in Alberta alone?
Yeah, Alberta's in the 90,000 range for sure, in terms of inactive sites. Yeah, the number.
I don't know how many across Canada, but the opportunity is immense. And I guess the kind of cool thing to point out on this one is that like 10% of the oil wells, if 10% of the oil wells in Alberta were repurposed for solar, that would provide that would basically provide all of the land mass required for the 2030 targets for solar development in Alberta. So yeah, there's plenty of space there.
Yeah, it's exciting with huge potential, that one for sure. Okay, the next question upvoted is RBC is in the news, or RBC in the news yesterday as the first financial institution to sign a long-term renewable energy purchase agreement for Southern Alberta. Is this a watershed for more agreements?
I can't really speak to if that's a watershed moment or not myself, actually. I guess we can definitely hope, and it'll be really interesting to see if that's the direction that we start going.
Yeah, it's nice to see some Canadian players getting into the game in Canada, right?
Yeah.
Okay, question from Maggie. What if there was some vertical integration between wind and solar farms owned by the fabrication facilities? Make them, install them, and operate them.
Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, I guess that's what we have seen with SpaceX is a really incredible example of vertical integration, and they really disrupted the whole space industry, space exploration industry by using that vertical integration model. So yeah, it'd be quite interesting to do some more research on the opportunities there.
Yeah, interesting idea. Next question, do you offer support or training for non-trades and the energy transition? For example, engineers, geos, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So the community-based or sort of general audience solar training program that we have is for absolutely anybody. We're really focusing our service provision towards fossil fuel industry and Indigenous workers. So those are the people that will get priority in terms of any grants that we can provide or subsidies that we can provide. But yeah, definitely pretty open program. And then our wind program follows that same model as well. That's not an electrician-focused program.
Awesome. Next question is, how is Canada/Alberta positioned competitively against the Far East, where a lot of this equipment, for example, the wind turbines, is manufactured currently?
Yeah, I think that's sort of related to the scenario I raised briefly about Ontario, where I don't think a lot of the manufacturers would have been in a position to bid competitively against areas like the Far East on these projects. And so the government attempted to implement a local procurement policies that required wind developers to purchase a certain amount of their components locally or from within the province. So it's pretty clear that they weren't in a competitive position at that point because these local procurement policies were required. However, it's possible that with enough support towards retooling their facilities and support in repositioning through sort of pivoting and diversifying, that a lot of the overhead costs to become competitive could be supported and put a lot of companies in a much more competitive position.
Awesome. We have time for one more question before we move on to move you all into breakout groups to discuss. The major cost stopping many from reskilling is foregone income and any financial insecurity. So how can we best promote reskilling, especially in a bad economy, for oil and gas now?
Yeah, I think, I mean, one thing we struggle with as an organization, and why we're really promoting this national upskilling initiative, is currently the majority of programs to get any support to get some training, you actually need a job first. So I think the biggest thing for the government to start doing is providing opportunities for people to train proactively. So if they don't have a job, they can go get training so that they can go get a job because they're trained for it. Right. So that's a real big flip that we need nationally.
Awesome. That makes total sense. Okay, now we're turning over the conversation to all of you. So we're going to, pretty soon here, we're going to put you into breakout rooms with some of the other participants. We'd love if you could turn your camera on and engage in conversations with each other. So we're asking you what aspects of the 4-point plan are most exciting to you and what would you like to see more of? So this is with respect to William's question. We encourage you to meet some new folks, reflect on what you've learned. And then after we have you in breakouts for a little while, we'll bring you back into the main room and ask you a few more questions on Slido, get your thoughts and insights, and then close you all out around 1 o'clock Mountain here. We'll put the questions, we can broadcast them to you as well, and we can put the questions in the chat so that you have those as well. So I will do that now. Thank you for asking, Maggie, because then those should stay with you as you go into your breakout rooms. We'd love for each of you to have rich conversations. So if we're ready, I'll invite you to join some breakout rooms. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and for contributing to the conversation. We've got a couple more Slido polls that we're going to run through and just see where everyone is at. So if we could hop back onto Slido, I'm going to go on my mobile device and actually go to it that way. So I think if we go to the next slide, we'll activate the next poll. There we go. So how desirable is this idea, transitioning energy workers in particular, for Canada's energy future? Very desirable, somewhat desirable, not very desirable, not at all desirable, or I'm not sure. Love to hear your thoughts now. Okay. People are stoked for this idea. It's great. Just let the last few come in if you're able to. That would be great. And then we can move on to the next one. Okay. I think maybe 10 is our threshold, so we'll move on to the next one. So why is or isn't this idea a desirable pathway towards our energy future? This is where we love to hear more from you. Opportunity and awareness may be lacking. It's necessary and urgent for workers and the climate. Desirable because we don't want to import our energy future. Oh, interesting. Good jobs equal happy people. It's desirable. Let's find ways to keep our workers and skill sets here instead of the brain drain, right? Our energy system and infrastructure is moving in this direction, and we need people to build this future and capture the economic growth opportunities. I love the positivity of all the people on the call. It's great. I think it's the future. We embrace it or get left behind. That's fantastic. We have to pivot with the rest of the world or become a have-not province in the future, and this is a key part of that pivot. This is the way to move forward. Okay, thank you for your responses. We'll move on to the next question. Should government invest in the Iron and Earth 4-point plan? So 1 would indicate a no, and 5 would be an overwhelming yes. What do you think? Should government invest in the 4-point plan? Okay. We've got some good support for government investment in this idea. This is great. Okay. So before we part ways, I'd like to take the opportunity to share our next big ideas for our Energy Future event hosted by Aaron Romanchuk with guest speaker Jason Cardiff. He's the CEO of Clean02, and in 2017 he helped launch the world's first commercialized microscale carbon capture system and is expanding the technology across Canada and the United States. We'll be speaking with Jason about carbon capture, utilization, and storage opportunities on August 11th. So please stay tuned to our social media channels for more exciting news and events like this one. A big thank you to Liam for all of you for attending, and to Calgary Economic Development for their contributions in making this happen today. So thank you for joining and have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.